I'm Aaron Baker from PhoneDog.com, and every now and again in the mobile space, you've got two devices, two brothers, if you will, that are separated at birth, and even though they're made by the same company, they have very different marketing strategies. That's the case here with the Google Nexus 5 made by LG and the LG G2. Both high-end Android devices, both with a lot of great specs, and both going head-to-head in a dogfight battle. Which one will win? Will it be the Nexus experience with KitKat or the LG experience with a 5.2-inch display and buttons on the back? We'll find out in part one of the dogfight. We got a dogfight battle between the LG Nexus 5 or the Google Nexus 5, depending on what you want to call it, and the LG G2. Both designed by LG. This one has a little bit more of a marketing play on the Google side. This one obviously is being marketed by LG and the carriers as more of a carrier-centric device, if you will. But they're brothers, kind of split at birth, if you will. They're different. I can't wait to talk about them and compare them in the dogfight battle with you here on youtube.com/PhoneDog. Nexus 5 is a recap 2.26 gigahertz quad-core Snapdragon 800 CPU. You've got a 5-inch 1080p HD display. Really, it's 4.95 inches, but they round up to 5 in most of the spec lists. 2 gigabytes of RAM, an 8-megapixel camera on the back with optical image stabilization and 1080p HD recording. Big Nexus logo there on the back also. 2,300 milliamp hour battery here. You've got 4G LTE capabilities on this device, and then you've got Android 4.4 known as KitKat. Makes me kind of hungry just talking about it. And like I said, 4G LTE connectivity on Sprint, AT&T, and T-Mobile. No Verizon compatibility on the Nexus 5, at least right now. But you can't get it on one of those three carriers. Now this device you can get on Verizon, you can get it on AT&T, T-Mobile, and Sprint. The LG G2. Specs-wise, it's a little bit different. It's got the same CPU, Snapdragon 800 CPU here. It's got a 5.2-inch 1080p HD display that is pretty much edge-to-edge. So a bigger display, a little bit less bezel around the sides. You've got a 13-megapixel camera on the back with optical image stabilization, and you notice a different little power, I should say button area, if you will, here between volume rocker and power button being on the back. Really nice from a gesture standpoint because oftentimes you're holding your phone like this. Easy access to the power button, and of course there's the knock feature, knock on, where you can turn the device on and off just by double tapping on the display itself. Other specs include 2 gigabytes of RAM, 32 gigabytes of internal storage. I should point out you can get this in 16 or 32 gigabyte configurations, and then it's got a 3,000 milliamp hour battery. Both of these have non-removable batteries and 4G LTE connectivity. So a bigger battery here, and I talked a lot in the review on the Nexus 5 about the battery in this device being 2,300 milliamp hours and being maybe a little bit too small for some use cases. So that's something to keep in mind. The Nexus 5 will explore that a little bit more in the full dogfight, but you've got a 3,000 milliamp hour battery over here and LG's user interface running atop Android 4.2, so an older version of Android. So you can obviously see going into this dogfight the trade-offs that you're getting with both devices. We're going to talk about that right now. But before I get too far into that, I want to thank our partners at Best Buy Mobile. They give us phones like the G2, like the Nexus 5, that we give to you for free on the site at instantwin.phonedog.com. When you go into Best Buy Mobile, whether it's AT&T, Sprint, Verizon, T-Mobile, they'll make sure you walk out with the carrier that works best for you. They're not paid on commission, they're unbiased. So they'll help you be at Verizon in your area or AT&T or Sprint, whatever works best for you. They'll make sure you're hooked up at Best Buy Mobile, the boys in blue as I like to call them. So you can see here, different look and feel as well. Obviously power button, just to do a quick kind of recap here of the way that they look. Power button on the Nexus 5 is on the right side, micro SIM card slot there on the right side as well. Camera location's a little bit different. Overall look and feel is different here. This is obviously a glossy device, and you can see it's a fingerprint magnet to an extent. This one, a matte touchback, and yeah, it does pick up the occasional fingerprint, but nothing too crazy. Over here, volume rocker on this side. Nothing over here with the exception of the micro SIM slot. Over on the left side, a micro USB charging port at the bottom of both, along with speakers on the Nexus 5. Over here, you've got your 3.5 millimeter headphone jack. And then up top on the Nexus 5 is where the 3.5 millimeter headphone jack lies. So a couple of things to point out. That's something to consider on this device. You know, you've got your micro USB charging port, 3.5 millimeter headphone jack in the same spot. A lot of people like that because if you're putting it in a cup holder in a car, it's easier to do that as opposed to having two cords coming out of each side. So something to keep in mind. On-screen buttons on both units. You can obviously see the differences here, even though they're both running Android, between not only Android 4.2 with LG's UI, but just the differences between an older version of Android versus a newer version of Android as well. You can see KitKat here is very different, but both of these have a very distinct look and feel, and you can see the notifications area here. LG's user interface running atop the G2 on a 5.2-inch display. You've got your shortcuts up top, your Q Slide apps, you've got your brightness, your sound, and of course your notifications. Over here, a little bit more of a plain experience on the front side, but when you go to the back side, you can see Google Plus integration here, and of course your frequently used settings, brightness, settings themselves, Wi-Fi calls, or I should say signal strength. You've got your battery life meter, airplane mode, Bluetooth location, and more, so easy access to those. And if you want the full settings list, you can always go in there and access those. Now it's tabbed over on the G2, and just showing you kind of the differences here between the two. It is a very vanilla experience over here, and very similar to what we've seen on previous versions of vanilla Android as well. If you remember the Nexus 4, you'll notice some immediate similarities to the look and feel of KitKat. Where it does look different though, the menu area, you can see the applications look entirely different here, and unlike previous versions of Android, you don't get that quick access to the widgets like you did in 4.1, 4.2, some of the older versions of Android. It's just easy access to the apps, and that's about it. To get to the widgets, a little bit different here. You can press and hold and access your wallpapers, your widgets, and your settings right here from the actual home screens themselves. And very similarly over here, when you press and hold, it brings up an option for apps, for widgets, and for wallpapers, and you can swipe through your apps, swipe through your widgets, and swipe through wallpapers as well. So kind of in some ways, it actually looks kind of similar, but then we'll back out here and you can see home screens here as well. So showing you the LG skin or LG user interface versus stock Android, you can see some differences and some similarities between the two, but you've got easy access to your widgets just by coming down here and adding those over on this device. There's no more easy access in the menu itself or in the applications area itself. Now, out of the box in the Nexus 5, tight integration with Google Now, as you would expect. We saw this to an extent on the Moto X. We're seeing more of it in KitKat. You've got easy access to Google Now by default just by swiping over to the far left. You've got it as kind of a home screen. You can turn that off, and I apologize, in the Nexus 5 review, I did not mention this, but you can go down here, for example, and take a look and customize it. Not only can you customize it, but you can also go down here, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. You can change the settings. You can turn Google Now off if you want to, and leave it on, and turn on your search memory rather, where it'll remember your search and deliver more relevant results over time. But you can always access it by saying, "Okay, Google," and it should be able to pop up, or it should pop up right away. "Okay, Google. Okay, Google. Weather in Dallas."
It's 65 degrees and mostly...
"Okay, Google. Show me what a tarantula looks like." I don't know why I did that. That's terrifying. And so you can see it brings up, of course, search results and images and news and things like that. So you can use as much like you can on the Moto X to compose a text message or make a phone call. It's intended to be there as an aid to you. And a little bit different here with the home screens as well. If you notice on the LG, for example, I've got my home screens here. I've got 3 out of the box. I can add up to, as you can see here, 7. And then change those around as I want to. I can configure those. I can have this one over on the far left. Over here, a little bit of a different implementation, and I covered this in the review, but I want to show you one more time just to make sure. So we'll bring in Dropbox, for example, and let's say I want to move this over to this one. Basically what I'm getting at is there's no option to actually just add blank home screens. You have to physically move an application or a widget over onto that home screen. Now you may be thinking, why would I have a home screen if I didn't have widgets or applications on it? Your point of view here, but one of the things that I find really useful is the ability to center my home screen. So for example, I can bring the one down here. You just don't have that ability to customize and move them around in a grid like you used to, or like you did on other skins. The one nice thing is it's nice to have more than 5 home screens, which was the default for some time in vanilla Android. So nice to see that here as well. Let's take a look at the browser here, just quick configuration of how that looks. 5.2-inch display. 5-inch display over here. We'll load up phonedog.com so you can take a look and see what it looks like. And you've got on-screen buttons here. Now the benefit of the G2 in terms of a customization, you've got a nice ability here to customize the buttons down here and change the color and the overall look and feel of them. So obviously PhoneDog here loaded up nice and fast on both of these units. Pretty quick. I can't see any visible lag on either one of these, but I did want to show you this as well. We'll go into settings and we'll come down here to the front touch buttons. Now let's say you're coming from maybe another Android device. Maybe you're coming from a Samsung device, an HTC device, and you're used to the menu button being on the left side. You can switch that around rather. You can switch the theme as well. If you want white buttons instead of black buttons, you can do that. And so it's nice to have that option to do that as opposed to having kind of the stock configuration like you do down here. Now, down here you've got back, home, and recent applications. Here you've got menu, home, and back, and you can add a 4th button if you want to, depending on what configuration you prefer. As you see, there's a ton of different options here. For example, this one, which brings down the notifications bar, this one, which activates quick memo, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of different options here to utilize this, and really from a customization standpoint, you get a lot in the LG G2. If you're looking for something where you kind of want to build it out on your own and look for the applications from the Google Play Store, the Nexus 5 might be your device. If you're looking for that out-of-the-box software experience, the G2, at least in terms of customization, might be the unit for you. Stay tuned for part 2. We're going to talk camera, more about the software. We'll talk more about what distinguishes KitKat from older versions of Android, and we'll wrap it up with quadrant standard speed tests. Keep it locked right here for part 2.